Hello, beautiful people, and welcome, hi, to what's going to be the pre-release on the Hydro Archon. That's right. We finally had leaks on the well-anticipated Hydro Archon, Focalors, and so we're just basically going to be running through the leaks that we have, doing our usual pre-release. I'm doing this a little bit earlier than I usually do these pre-releases because I know that people are pretty excited for the next Archon, and because these are like really early leaks, they're not on Project Amber just yet, we can go through it nonetheless. As you can see, this is 100% totally a real kit. If this wasn't clear already, this is an April Fool's video. I don't want to just change the title the next day or whatever, because I know that a lot of people have YouTube on their second monitor, they don't actually look at the titles, and I don't want to mislead anyone into thinking this is an actual real kit. It's not. It's an April Fool's video. I had a lot of fun with it. I designed the kit myself. I think that the numbers are actually balanced. Let me know what you think of the kit, actually, like just without April Fool's saying, like, let me know what you think of my kit design. But yeah, definitely one of the real kits of all time. Let's get started by just looking at the normal attacks. So, normal attack, Justice, 5 consecutive strikes, so it's a 5-hit combo. When the 5th strike hits opponents, Focalors will gain the Scale of Judgment effect for 2 seconds. Charge attack is normal. But what is Scale of Judgment? Scale of Judgment is, while Focalors is under the effect of Scale of Judgment, the delay before unleashing her next charge attack will be removed. Her charge attack will also be replaced by Judicial Verdict, which deals physical damage based on Focalors' max HP. It is also considered a normal attack. So from what I understand, it's going to work a lot like Days Burst, where it actually just replaces the attack type altogether. So it will not trigger on charge attack effects, but it will trigger on normal attack effects, even if like you hold down your mouse click for it. But yeah, so basically she's got her normal attack stuff, and she can replace that after she does her 5th strike with a special normal attack, basically. And as we'll see later on, she has other ways of gaining the Scale of Judgment effect, and so she'll be able to do that more reliably. But worth noting, this is not a Hydro Infusion, right? It's still physical damage, but it is normal attacks, which means it can be infusible through characters like Bennett if you want to use her normal attacks to be able to apply Pyro so that your Hydro damage and the rest of your kit can vaporize, or with a unit like Indaka to just give her Hydro Infusion and play her in a mono Hydro team. Anyways, looking at the scalings, the hit damage is pretty similar to what you'll find on a character like Beto. It's pretty shit, basically. But the Judicial Verdict damage is around 5% max HP at level 9. You can compare it to other characters that have HP scaling, so let's do that. Let's compare it to Elan's Burst, right, is 8% HP 3 times, right, so 24. So it's a 5th of a Yelan Burst, which is pretty low. However, from what I've seen on the early footage, it is pretty quick. So it is actually a pretty reasonable scaling for what we'll see later is a character that's not really all that focused on their normal attacks, meaning that you actually do get rewarded a decent amount if you do end up deciding for a unit like Indaka to go for Hydro Infusions. But it won't be the only way to go about it, and we'll get to that. Elemental skill, Trial by Water. Summons a Hydro Serpent, dealing AoE Hydro damage. Only one Hydro Serpent can exist at once. Hydro Serpent. The Serpent follows your active character around and bites a nearby opponent every 3 seconds, delivering a Guilty Verdict to them. Enemies affected by Guilty Verdict take Hydro damage based on Focalors' max HP every second while a Hydro Serpent is summoned. So, from what I understand, you cast your Hydro Serpent, you cast your E, it deals AoE Hydro damage, but it doesn't apply the verdict, the Guilty Verdict to them, right? So that's just single instance damage. And then you've got a Serpent that bites people, and when it bites someone, it poisons them, it delivers a Guilty Verdict, which is Hydro damage over time. If you're in AoE, it'll take 3 seconds before it bites the second enemy, so your AoE Hydro application won't be like incredibly consistent with this only. The ICD is 2 seconds on the Guilty Verdict, which means that they will take Hydro damage over time, and every 2 seconds it will apply 1.5 units of Hydro to them. The damage on the initial hit is 8.27% of her max HP, which is about the equivalent of 1 Yelan Exquisite Throw, so it's pretty low damage. And the damage over time is 1.65% per second, which is also pretty low. You don't really use this for the damage, it's mostly for the Hydro Hydro application. It lasts for 25 seconds with a 10-second cooldown, meaning that this can pretty reliably be used for Hydro application. However, unlike a unit like Sing So, it's not every second, it's every 2 seconds, but in exchange for that, it's 1.5 units of Hydro. Now, we'll be able to look at the ways in which this can be used to abuse some interactions, but before we do that, let's go into the burst. Elemental Burst. The power of water is its ability to take any shape. Coveting the shapes of the living, pure water can take on many forms. Enter the Divine Judgment form. Divine Judgment. Any Hydro Serpents will be morphed into Hydro Tortoises that follow you around. Well, in this state, Focalors' resistance to interruption is greatly increased. The effects of Divine Judgment will be cleared when Focalors leaves the field. Hydro Tortoises. The tortoise spins around and deals AoE Hydro damage based on Focalors' max HP upon being summoned, and then again when Focalors' normal attacks hit an enemy. Dealing damage this way gives Focalors the skill of Judgment effect for 2 seconds. Only one Hydro Tortoise can exist at once. The damage is considered skill damage. Basically, what the burst does is it transforms your skill into something else. You know, the power of water is its ability to take any shape. Well, in this case, it's just changing the shape of your skill. It's still skill damage, so it's still your skill doing something. Your burst itself isn't actually doing any damage, it's just changing your skill to do something else. Oh yeah, also, small correction from earlier. It's not 4 times per second, it's 2.5 times per second on the normal attack. But either way, right? So basically, this incentivizes you to use her on field and normal attack with her burst. Not for the normal attacks itself, but because when you're in your burst, you have the tortoise that procs on normal attacks. The scaling on it at level 9 is 20% of Focalors' max HP, which we can again compare to Yelan. We can see that it's about half of Yelan's skill. However, instead of hitting once, it's up to once every 1.7 seconds, which means you can get up to 5 of them. One when you cast it, and then at 1.7, at 3.4, at 5.1, at 6.8. So 5 instances of this, and because her normal attacks don't inherently Hydro infuse, if you don't run her with a unit like Hadaka, your Hydro application is actually pretty slow during your burst, meaning that it's pretty easy to forward vape these hits. Which is likely why the developers decided to put the scaling as a little bit lower than what a character like Yelan does, because, well, usually Yelan's E isn't something that you're going to be vaping on every rotation. Now let's take a look at the passives again, because that's going to tie everything together. So first, Focalors gains Elemental Mastery Burst based on 0.5% of her max HP. Now her base stat, she has a very high base HP, the highest out of any character, and she has HP percent Ascension, right? And her damage all scales with HP, which means that if you build her for her damage, she's inherently just gonna get a bunch of free Elemental Mastery, which means that if you somehow get to vape parts of her kit, they're gonna vape for a pretty significant amount. Looking at the base stuff, right, 16,831 base HP, 28.8% from the Ascension, 46 from Ascends, for example, and then let's say 20% from subs. For now, let's not take a look at any artifact sets. Flat HP, you'll get about 5k. Total HP, right, so just basically for free, you're almost at 40k. Right, because she has such high base HP and HP percent Ascension, right, which is about almost 200 Elemental Mastery, basically just for free, from her Ascension 1. And then her Ascension 2, her normal and charge attacks give her a stack of repeated defense for 10 seconds, up to 5 stacks. Hydro Tortoises deal more damage based on 2% of Focalors' max HP for each stack of repeated defense. So, the base scaling is at around 20%, you can get up to 5 stacks, and with the way that it lines up, you basically do get 5 stacks if you hold down your Scale of Judgment infused, like, special normal attack, you will get all your stacks on each hit. And you can potentially stack it up for the first hit before you use your burst. Point being, it basically changes her ratio from 20% up to 30%. Now, if you have to dodge, things like that, you're not gonna get that additional damage, but it's basically a way to reward you for organizing your teams properly, organizing your rotations, making sure that you don't have to dodge at the wrong moment, all that. But yeah, so from what we've seen in the kit so far, it seems like there's a few different ways you can go about doing things. Her skill is very much an off-field thing, so you can use her as an off-fielder if you do, so Playstyle 1, off-field. The advantage is, well, you focus on E, Initially, you only get the AoE Hydro once, but over time, more and more enemies will start getting bitten by the serpent, so in a reasonable rotation, if you use it at the very beginning, it's pretty easy to maintain solid Hydro application onto enemies without too much of a problem. Now, you do have to be careful not to exceed your Hydro application, because at the end of the day, it is still somewhat slow. It's only once every 2 seconds. The gauge is high, but that means that if you lose your Hydro, it's going to be hard to get it back. So this is more to use in teams that either don't really want to have Hydro as an aura, so stuff like Bloom teams, for example, stuff like Burgeon, and that's where the 1.5 units is really useful in Burgeon teams, because when enemies are burning, often tends to happen in Burgeon, unfortunately, they have a burning aura, which is 2 units of burning, and then they have underlying Pyro, and they have underlying Dendro. If you have a way to react with the burning aura, well, you can weaken it, and potentially you can remove it altogether, right? That's what Hydro does, because Hydro against burning and against Pyro is a 2x side for the gauge consumption in the reaction. That means that when enemies are burning, if you apply Hydro to them, it's gonna put out the burning, right? If I get them to start burning, and then I use Mona's normal attack, it vaporizes. But as you can see, we don't generate a Bloom Seed to react with, right? Because we only applied 1 unit of Hydro, we had 2 units of burning, or 1 unit of Hydro gets multiplied by 2, so that's 2 units, and we have just enough to remove the burning, and nothing left over to react with the Dendro aura that was left on the enemy afterwards. If instead we use something like Child's Tap E, which instead of 1 unit of Hydro is 2 units of Hydro, you're gonna see that the Overflow Hydro is gonna react with the leftover Dendro, and we're gonna get a Vaporize and a Bloom at the same time. Right? A Vaporize and a Bloom. Then we can Burgeon this. So, basically, Focalors applying 1.5 units of Hydro here makes Burgeon teams like this possible, just from her baseline off-field. However, it is still 1.5 units when she uses her burst, which means that you can also use her as an on-fielder for Burgeon teams. If you do that, then, like I said, right, you're gonna get Bloom, but you're also still gonna get Vaporize, which means that you get to actually use her relatively high scaling on her Tortoise and actually vape that while still generating seeds for your Pyro unit to be able to react. Now, one very interesting interaction is, again, right? Because at a baseline, she does not get Hydro Infusion. If you play her with Bennett C6 in a Burgeon team, she can be the one to destroy the seeds. And if you do that, then you can get even more value out of your passive that gives you EM based on your HP. You can basically play her as both your Burgeon trigger and your forward vape carry. But yeah, so that's the other playstyle. So playstyle 2 is like on-field Burgeon, and it's basically focus on Q. And then playstyle 3 is just gonna be on-fielder for Mono Hydro, where you focus on Q plus a Scale of Judgment. But yeah, so as usual with our pre-releases, let's do our weapons, right? So she is going to be Claymore character. We still don't have any leaks on her signature weapon, so unfortunately I won't be able to look into that. We can look at the ones that we have right now. So we have the Beacon, we have Red Horn, Skyward, we have Song. Let's not use Song of Broken Pines. Let's also not use on Forge and Wolves because she's an HP scaler that doesn't really have attack scaling, so like they're just gonna be shit anyways. Akomaru doesn't do much either because her burst damage isn't burst damage, it's skill damage. Blackcliff, we can look at Favd, we can look at the Sea Lord, at Joel, we can look at Mailed Flower, we can look at Rain Slasher, we can look at Serpent Spine, we can look at the Bell. But yeah, at a baseline, right, she's an HP scaler, but she's also a crit scaler, just like fucking everyone else. So if you play her without a shield, you'll get the HP from the Bacon, and you'll also get the crit, which is just a valuable stat. So pretty pog, pretty good. Red Horn, you get the little like additional normal attack damage from this, but it doesn't really do that much. It's mainly just a crit stat stick. It's still good though. Skyward's Pride, so to actually take a look at how good Skyward Pride could be, we're gonna need to look at her energy requirements. So we do have some information on that. Particle generation is 1 particle every 3 seconds. Technically, there's a 5% chance for it not to generate a particle, which is not gonna be fun, but hey, it's Hoyoverse. What do you want? What do you want from me, man? I didn't make this. I didn't decide on this. But yeah, so basically 1 particle every 3 seconds, so in a 20-second rotation, that's like 6-7 particles. We can round up to 7, because sure. But, interestingly, her energy cost is actually pretty low at 50 energy, which means if you play her solo Hydro, if you play her, let's say, with Bennett, Nahida, Kazuha, I think is a pretty fine baseline, then we'll be left with, let's say, 2 Bennett E's, neither of which are caught. Nahida, let's say 1 set of particles is caught by her, and 2 are not, and then 2 Kazuha E's that are both not caught by her. Let's start by looking at no favs. So without any favs, that's 40 energy baseline, the cost is 50, so ER requirements would be around 130% ER if you don't have any favs on your team. If you start putting like Fav Kazuha, 118, Fav Nahida, and Fav Kazuha, 108. All that to say, even as solo Hydro, your ER requirements are pretty low, right? So it's nothing too crazy, which is nice, right? It's a nice change from something that's been pretty prevalent in Sumeru, which is energy-hungry characters. It's nice to have something that is a little bit less energy-hungry. All in all, that does mean that the ER weapons are not really good. They're like, fine, whatever. Blackcliff is fine. Favd, fine. Joel, bad, right? It's really bad. We don't even have to put it. Mailflower, it's some EM, which is not bad, but honestly, like, not much of a point. Rain Slasher, you can't really take advantage of both the passive and the EM, so it's not that great. So that leaves us with Serpent Spine and the Bell. The Bell is actually okay. It's an acceptable option. It's not great because at the end of the day, unless you actually put a shielder on your team, which like you can do, but you don't really want to have to. The Bell passive shield, the uptime on it is really bad, right? It's a pretty long cooldown, so you won't have it on every rotation. But if you otherwise have another way to get a shield, it's fine. Serpent Spine is obviously always a good option. But yeah, so all in all, for weapon options, generally, the Bell is like a fine free-to-play option, with Serpent Spine also being pretty good. When it comes to like Blackcliff or like non-gacha weapons, you can just use the Mailflower if you end up using Focalors in a Burgeon Vape team. Fine for Burgeon Vape. Otherwise, if you use her as a like just strict support just for her E, you can use Fav even though you're not gonna need the ER just because it generates ER for the team, which is always nice. But yeah, artifact sets. She's probably gonna get a signature artifact set, but again, we haven't had any leaks on that yet. In the meantime, she's gonna be good with anything that can buff skill damage, which we don't really have right now, or just HP or EM stats, or Hydro damage. So for now, it would probably be something like 2-piece TOM, 2-piece Gilded maybe, or 2-piece Hydro, or even 2-piece with both of the Hydro sets. That's fine, but generally it's basically going to be a 2-piece for now, best in slot, because it's really only like your only real option. You can also go 4-piece Tenacity, best in slot for support, decent for carry, just because, right, again, you're only looking for 2-pieces, and so losing out on a 2-piece to get the 4-piece Tenacity isn't that bad because a 2-piece Tenacity is still something that you'd want to have anyways. You can go for something like 4-piece Gilded. It's fine, it can work, but I'm not too sure about it. Artifact stats, the general thing is going to be HP, Hydro, Crit, right? She does not really need ER, so that's not really much of a consideration. You can consider EM, Hydro, Crit. That's also a potentially fine option. You can also have just HP, like Hydro HP, but generally it's going to be overshadowed by just HP, Hydro, Crit. It's generally going to be her best option, and that's really what you want to be going for. Now let's take a look at her team options. Burgeon, Vape, Carry. I actually did do some personal DPS calcs for Focalors in some teams. As we can see, right, the personal single target in the Burgeon Vape teams is obviously a lot higher than in the other teams, because in those teams, right, Bennett, Nahida, Zhongli, Bennett, Nahida, Kazuha, the rest of your team isn't doing that much damage. They're doing some, it's not nothing, but it's not like a particularly significant amount. The team is built to make Focalors be the one to deal a lot of damage. As such, it's normal that the personal DPS is going to be a lot higher than when you look at the mono Hydro teams, but still, this is like actually very reasonable. Your team DPS is actually going to look pretty high in single target and even higher in AoE, which is always nice. Overall, Focalors is looking to be the Hydro Archon for real. These teams, which so far seem to me like they're going to be the best ones, are actually like really good. You can always replace the C6 Bennett with something like Toma and have Toma be building full EM. I personally prefer the Bennett thing because it gives you a lot of free healing, but Toma definitely still works. Your Burgeon is going to do a little bit more damage, but you don't really take advantage of Bennett's attack buff, so it's far from necessary, right, in a team like this. But yeah, obviously it's a Burgeon team, so it's going to be better in AoE than single target, but it is not just a Burgeon team, it's a Burgeon Vape team with a Vape carry, and so it's still more than reasonable in single target. It's still like pretty solid, and I am just so happy to finally see the kind of character that we need to make Burgeon have its reason to be. In the current state of the game, Hyperbloom's kind of just better than Burgeon in basically everything, because even in AoE, you can still generate like 1 seed per enemy, which makes Hyperbloom still more than fine in AoE, and because we don't really have the units to make Burgeon work all that well, then Burgeon just doesn't have that much of a reason to be, right? Obviously, you've got stuff like Thundering Fury that's pretty good inside of its niche, but it is very restricted. It's pretty niche for sure. It's nice to have something that can actually take advantage of the potential upsides that Burgeon actually has, which we didn't have before, right? Like the Hydro Kit working really well in Burgeon is basically all because of the 1.5 gauge units, right? Without this character wouldn't work in Burgeon Vape. You just wouldn't get any Burgeon, and instead of getting this in like 40k personal in single target, you'd get 34k, right? And in AoE, instead of 48, you'd get the 34. It's a pretty big downgrade. That being said though, Burgeon is not the only way, or the only team where you can play her, although I do expect it to be the best. You can also play her just in normal forward Vape, carry. It's still going to be very good using a unit like Xiangling. I know. I'll bust Xiangling. I know. But it's still going to be good. It's still like very solid. It's not going to be really possible to use her in reverse vape to actually enable Xiangling to vape because the Hydro app is just not fast enough for that. You can use her in Mono Hydro. It's also good. Mono Hydro teams in general, not the best in AoE, so having a character that actually has AoE with the tortoises is nice because she's an HP scaler. That also means that she benefits from Hydro Resonance. It means that you don't really need to have a healer that much because you're gonna have so much HP. But yeah, so all in all, Mono Hydro is also gonna be good. You can use her just as a Burgeon enabler, and she's still going to be good at that, right? You can reliably get some seed generation on all characters every 2 seconds. That's pretty nice. You can use her in freeze. She's actually pretty solid. Get a solid. This is solid in waters. Okay, whatever. She's solid in freeze because, again, right, you can use that off-field Serpent to apply Hydro every 2 seconds. Because it's 1.5 units of Hydro, it is actually often going to make it so that your freeze lasts a little bit longer than it would with 1 unit. Depends on the order of application, but it is something that can happen. She's a fine, just off-fielder Hydro application for freeze that has the downside of not being much more than a Hydro application, right? It's not really damage or a buff to the rest of your team, but it has the upside of having really high uptime and moving with you, unlike stuff like Kokomi's Jellyfish that like you can't move it more than once every 20 seconds, and then that like needs specific rotations to be able to have 100% uptime. This has 100% uptime without even trying. But yeah, so still pretty solid in freeze. You don't want to on-field her though because you are going to shatter. You can use her in shatter, but it's not very good. You do get some EM from your stuff, but it's just shatter just sucks. Like you don't. I'm not even gonna put it in. Shatter sucks. Don't go for shatter. She's fine in Taser. There's no real reason to use her over the other options in Taser though, so I personally wouldn't really recommend it. I think it's a bit of a waste of her kit to put her in Taser, but she does function there. Nilo teams, she's gonna be good. It's not gonna be like the premier Hydro option because with Nilo you'd rather have fast application with low gauge unit than medium speed application with high gauge unit, because applying 1.5 units of Hydro is still only gonna be 1 bloom. You'd rather have 1 unit of Hydro but a little bit faster. That being said, it is brain dead. It just does it by itself without actually having to swap into anything, which is a pretty big upside. All in all, fine option, not insane. That really does it for the archetypes where I could see her being played. So let's take a look at the Constellations now. Constellation 1, Culpabilité. Using your elemental skill while a Hydro Tortoise is already on the field will create a Hydro Serpent that will not get morphed by Divine Judgment. So basically, if you use your skill while your burst is active, you'll get a Hydro Serpent on top of your Tortoise. Once your burst expires, right, you you can still only have one Hydro Serpent at once, so one of the serpents will disappear. Basically, this, if you're playing her in Burgeon Vape, isn't useful. You don't even want to use it, but it does give her a bunch of additional damage and particle generation and Hydro Application if you want to play her in as a Hydro Enabler for Sangling, or if you want to play her in Mono Hydro, it's just additional free damage. Alright, Constellation 2, Lèse Majesté. Hydro-related elemental reactions have their effects enhanced against enemies affected by Guilty Verdict, which, to remind you, is her E. Now, even when your serpents aren't on field when you use Burst, the enemies are still affected by Guilty Verdict, they just don't take damage from it. But they're still affected by this, which means that the Constellation 2 will still work. Electrocharge deals damage twice as often. Now, from what I understand, it doesn't actually affect the gauge consumption. It still consumes gauge at the same, with the exact same thing, but it just adds an instance of damage on each Electrocharge proc. Vaporize reduces its target's Pyro and Hydro resistance by 30% for 10 seconds, which is huge for the Burgeon Vape teams. Hydro Swirl deals AoE damage, so for those of you who didn't know, Hydro Swirl actually does not do AoE damage, it just does damage to the main target and applies Hydro to the others, but it doesn't actually do AoE damage, so that's nice. Hitting frozen enemies with blunt attacks triggers shatter damage without removing frozen, so this actually gives her the possibility of being played as an on-fielder for shatter teams, because again, right, she hits pretty quickly when she's like in her burst, right, doing the special normal attacks. It's like 2.5 times per second, so that's a pretty reasonable amount of total attacks, and so that's a lot of shatter procs potentially. Hydro Crystallized shields have their 150% increased shield strength against every element, which is also a pretty big deal. It means that you can use her with stuff like Albedo, and you're actually gonna get a pretty reasonable shield even if you don't go EM, just from your Crystallize. And triggering Bloom deals 30% of Rupture's damage, which means that when you trigger a Bloom reaction, you'll get some of the damage that it would do if you let it explode just instantly, which is also pretty nice. I'd say that the most important, or the strongest one is probably this one, but all of them have their own like little niche where they can be very useful. All in all, this is a pretty solid constellation. It looks like it's a pretty fun constellation, which is it's difficult for me, right? Because I don't want to go for constellations, but this looks kind of fun, so I don't know. Constellation 3, Récréation du Tribunal. Increase the level of the power of water is its ability to take any shape by 3. Maximum upgrade is 15. That's the burst. That's pretty good. Jurisprudence. Trial by water gains 1 additional charge. So that's the elemental skill, which makes the C1 more easier to take advantage of. It also helps you to front load AoE Hydro Application for setups or for Bloom or Burgeon teams. Plaidoirie is Constellation 5. It increases your E-Talent level, which is dog shit. It doesn't really do anything. And then Constellation 6. Using your elemental skill while a Hydro Serpent is already on the field will create a Hydro Tortoise. While under the effect of Divine Judgment, Focalors gains 60% crit damage. So basically you get your burst without having to use your burst, which is a pretty big deal. If you use your skill, well, you already have a skill on the field, so basically from the C4, if you do E and then E, then your second E, instead of just replacing your Serpent, is gonna summon a Hydro Tortoise on top of the Serpent, which means that you have your burst without having to use your burst, which is pretty good, right? That's pretty nice. And it can last for the whole 25 seconds skill duration instead of just the 8 seconds from the burst. And then Divine Judgment gives you 50% crit damage. All in all, the C6 is pretty strong, but yeah, it's whale stuff, so whatever. All in all, this character is looking to be pretty strong. We're getting a bunch of new interactions that we didn't have before, mainly a bunch of really cool Burgeon stuff, and we're finally getting our first real Hydro carry, right? All of our Hydro units are better as enablers than as carries, and while you could argue that in Burgeon Vape, you're as much of an enabler as you are a carry, you're getting forward Vape, right? Like, I'd argue that's a carry design. I think it's really cool. We finally have an actual good Hydro carry that's still actually useful in non-carry roles. All in all, very versatile, pretty strong character. Again, as usual, right? Always wait for day 1 testing before making your decision on whether or not to pull for a unit. But, right, I'm pretty optimistic for this. I hope I'm not going to be wrong. I hope I didn't miss anything crazy. But, yeah, that is going to do it for the Focalors pre-release. So thank you for dropping by. Thank you for watching. I hope you had a really nice time, and I'll see you around. Bye, YouTube.